opens in a grand law office with sleek furniture, polished wooden desks, and an air of authority that matches the man sitting behind the biggest desk in the room. Mr. Smith, dressed in an expensive suit, is barking orders at his assistant, Anna. She nervously fumbles with a stack of papers, apologizing for missing a deadline. Smith doesn't even look up as he grumbles. "I don't pay you to make excuses, Anna. If you can't handle something as simple as time management, maybe you should look for a job that doesn't require a clock." Before Anna can respond, the door to the office opens. A black man in modest clothing steps inside. He walks with a quiet confidence, his eyes scanning the room briefly before landing on Smith. The interruption is enough to make Smith raise his head, irritation flickering in his sharp eyes. "Are you lost?" Smith's voice is laced with sarcasm as he leans back in his chair. "This isn't a charity. We don't handle walk-ins." The man, David, remains calm. "Good afternoon. I believe I have a matter that requires your expertise. I'd like to request a meeting." Smith snorts and looks David up and down, his gaze pausing on David's simple attire. "A meeting? With me?" His laugh is short and mocking. "Do you have any idea how much my time costs? I doubt you can even afford to sit in that chair." David doesn't flinch. "I understand your time is valuable. So is mine." Smith raises an eyebrow, amused by the boldness. For a moment he leans forward as if considering, then waves a hand dismissively. "Fine, say whatever you came here to say, but make it quick. I have real clients waiting." David steps forward, pulling a neatly folded document from his pocket and placing it on the edge of Smith's desk. His calm demeanor contrasts sharply with Smith's arrogance, creating a tension that fills the room. Smith leans back in his chair, barely hiding his disinterest. "All right, you've got 2 minutes. Let's hear whatever grand idea brought you into my office." David stays calm, his voice steady. "I'm in need of legal representation for a corporate acquisition. It's a high-stakes deal involving multiple international entities. I was referred to your firm because of its reputation." Smith raises an eyebrow, his lips curling into a smirk. "A corporate acquisition? You? Let me guess, you're buying a food cart or maybe a small shed. This isn't the kind of place that handles lemonade stand disputes." David doesn't react to the insult, maintaining his composure. "It's a substantial transaction. The acquisition is valued at—" Smith interrupts, holding up a hand. "Save it. You're wasting my time." He glances at his watch dramatically, then shakes his head. "Do you even know what legal fees for something like this would look like, or are you just here to get free advice?" David's gaze sharpens slightly, but his voice remains calm. "I assure you I'm fully prepared to cover the costs. I've done my research." Smith lets out a short laugh, leaning forward and tapping his desk. "You've done your research? That's cute. Look, I don't know who sent you here, but let me save you some trouble. We don't have time for people looking to play pretend." The room grows quiet for a moment, the tension thick. David looks directly at Smith, his tone unwavering. "I'm not playing pretend. I came here with a legitimate request. I'd appreciate it if you'd take this seriously." Smith stares at him for a moment, then shakes his head, leaning back in his chair again. "Seriously? You walked into my office, dressed like that, spinning some story about a high-stakes deal, and you expect me to believe it? Do I look like I was born yesterday?" David holds his ground, saying nothing. The contrast between his calm confidence and Smith's dismissive arrogance fills the air with unease. Finally, Smith sighs and waves his hand. "All right, I've humored you enough. Unless you've got $1 billion bank statement hidden in that pocket, this conversation is over." David's expression remains unreadable as he adjusts his sleeve and steps back. "Thank you for your time." Smith watches him leave, muttering under his breath, "What a joke." The scene ends with Smith turning his attention back to his desk, completely unaware of the storm he's just invited into his life. Smith's patience, already razor-thin, snaps. He slams a folder shut on his desk, his irritation spilling over. "I don't have time for people like you," he says coldly, his voice sharp enough to cut through the room. David remains composed, standing tall despite the condescension. "I assure you, I came here with genuine business. It's unfortunate you can't see that." Smith narrows his eyes, rising halfway from his chair. "I see exactly what this is. Somebody is waltzing in here, wasting my time with fairy tales about corporate acquisitions. Do you think I built this firm catering to daydreamers?" David doesn't flinch. His calm demeanor only seems to fuel Smith's frustration. The lawyer grabs the phone on his desk, pressing a button to summon security. "This is Smith," he says curtly into the receiver. "I need someone to escort a visitor out of my office. Now." Hanging up, Smith looks at David with a smug expression, folding his arms. "You should have known better than to walk in here without credentials, without proof, without a clue." David takes a slow, deliberate breath. "You're making a mistake," he says evenly, his voice steady and unshaken. "You'll regret this decision." Smith laughs, a sharp, humorless sound. "Regret? The only thing I regret is wasting my time on this little charade." The door swings open, and a uniformed security guard steps inside, surveying the situation. Smith points a dismissive finger toward David. "Please show this gentleman the way out." David doesn't argue or raise his voice. Instead, he straightens his posture, adjusting his sleeve with a quiet precision. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Smith," he says calmly, his tone polite but with a quiet confidence that lingers in the air. He walks past the guard and toward the door, his movements steady and deliberate. For a moment the office falls silent except for the faint echo of his footsteps. Smith watches him leave, smirking as he settles back into his chair. "What a waste of time," Smith mutters to himself, shaking his head. He picks up another file from his desk, already forgetting the encounter. But as the door closes behind David, there's an unmistakable feeling of unease in the air, one that even Smith, in his arrogance, can't quite ignore. As the door shuts behind David, the office feels a little too quiet. Anna, the secretary, cautiously approaches Mr. Smith's desk, holding a fresh stack of files. Her steps are hesitant, as though she's carefully considering whether to speak. "That man," she says softly, placing the papers on the corner of the desk. "He didn't seem ordinary." Smith doesn't even look up. He's already engrossed in the papers in front of him, flipping through them with sharp, impatient motions. "Oh, please, Anna. Don't start with overthinking," he says with a chuckle. "I can spot nobody a mile away." Anna lingers, her brow furrowed. "But the way he spoke," she pressed gently, "he didn't sound like someone making things up. He seemed serious, confident." Smith finally looks up, annoyance flashing in his eyes. "Confident?" he repeats mockingly. "Sure, if by confident you mean delusional. Did you see what he was wearing? He looked like he was about to ask for directions to the nearest bus stop." Anna shifts uncomfortably, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Still, I don't know. There was something about him, like he wasn't here by accident." Smith waves a dismissive hand, leaning back in his chair. "Trust me, Anna. I've dealt with all kinds in this business. That guy, he's a small-timer. Probably heard my name somewhere and thought he could talk his way into a handout." Anna doesn't reply, but the uncertainty in her expression lingers. She takes a step back, clutching the remaining files to her chest. As Smith returns to his work, Anna glances towards the closed door, a faint crease of doubt forming on her forehead. Something about David had struck her as different, even important, but she knows better than to argue with Mr. Smith. She quietly retreats to her desk while Smith's smug chuckle echoes softly in the background, as if he's already forgotten the encounter. The next morning, Mr. Smith strides into his office, radiating confidence. Today is a big day. A meeting with a high-profile client that could mean millions for the firm. Dressed in his sharpest suit, he adjusts his tie in the reflection of a glass wall, a self-assured smile tugging at his lips. Anna, he calls out as he picks up his leather portfolio, make sure the conference room is ready. This deal is the kind that keeps the lights on around here. Yes, Mr. Smith, Anna replies, her voice slightly strained. She glances at him, but something in her eyes suggests hesitation. Smith doesn't notice. He's already halfway down the hall, his shoes clicking confidently on the polished floor. As he approaches the large double doors of the conference room, he takes a deep breath, preparing to deliver the pitch that will undoubtedly seal the deal. He pushes the doors open with practiced ease and steps inside. His stride falters almost immediately. Sitting at the head of the long, sleek conference table is none other than David, the man he had dismissed and insulted just the day before. David is no longer dressed in simple, modest clothing. Now he wears a tailored suit, his posture commanding respect. Around him sit several executives, all turned toward David with attentive expressions, clearly waiting for him to speak. Smith's confident smile melts into confusion, then shock. His fingers tighten slightly on the folder he's holding. For a moment he feels as though the air has been knocked out of him. David notices Smith standing frozen in the doorway. A subtle smile plays on his lips as he leans back in his chair, his calm composure unshaken. "Ah, Mr. Smith," David says smoothly, his voice carrying across the room. "So glad you could join us. Please have a seat." Smith hesitates, glancing at the executives who are now looking at him curiously. His voice, usually so sharp, wavers slightly as he manages a strained, You're the client?" David's smile widens slightly. "Not quite," he says, his tone polite but with an unmistakable edge of authority. "I'm the owner. This is my company." The words hit Smith like a freight train. His jaw slackens as he tries to process what he's hearing. The man he had so arrogantly dismissed yesterday now sat at the helm of the very corporation he had been working tirelessly to impress. "I believe we were about to begin," David says, gesturing to the empty chair near the far end of the table far from the head. "Feel free to take a seat." Smith, still reeling, swallows hard and makes his way to the chair, his usual confidence replaced with a growing sense of dread. As he sits down, he can't help but glance at David again, the realization of his mistake sinking deeper with every passing second. The meeting begins, but for Smith, the room feels smaller, the air heavier. For the first time in years, he is completely out of his depth. The meeting progresses with formalities, but Smith is barely paying attention. His mind races, replaying the events of the previous day like a bad dream. Every dismissive word he had hurled at David now echoes louder in his memory. He fidgets with his pen, sneaking uneasy glances at David, who remains calm and composed, completely in control of the room. Finally, David clears his throat, signaling the room's attention. "Before we move forward," he begins, his voice steady and deliberate, "I'd like to address something that happened yesterday." Smith's stomach tightens. He shifts uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact, as David continues. "Mr. Smith," David says, his gaze now fixed firmly on the lawyer. "Do you recall a man coming into your office yesterday? Someone seeking legal counsel for a corporate acquisition?" Smith hesitates, his mouth dry. I might," he stammers, though his voice lacks the confidence it once carried. David nods. "Let me help refresh your memory." He was dressed modestly, spoke respectfully, and outlined a legitimate business request. Despite that, he was met with condescension, mockery, and outright dismissal. The room grows silent, the tension palpable. The executives glance between David and Smith, their expressions curious and skeptical. Smith's face reddens, and his lips press into a thin line. "If this is how you treat potential clients," David says, his voice growing sharper, "I can only imagine how you handle your current ones. Disrespect and arrogance have no place in professional dealings, especially with someone you don't even know." Smith opens his mouth to respond, but no words come out. David doesn't wait for him to try. He looks around the room, addressing the executives. Ladies and gentlemen, my company values integrity, respect, and professionalism in all our partnerships. Unfortunately, Mr. Smith and his firm have demonstrated none of those qualities. Seed. Smith's face drains of colour as David leans forward slightly, his tone firm but controlled. As of now, my company will no longer consider this firm for our legal needs. I have already begun discussions with another firm, one that treats people with the dignity they deserve. The room remains silent, but the weight of David's words is undeniable. Smith stares down at the table, his hands gripping the edges of his portfolio. He knows there's no coming back from this. David stands, adjusting his suit jacket. "Thank you for your time," he says, his gaze lingering on Smith for a moment before turning to the others. "I hope this serves as a reminder that professionalism should never be compromised." With that, he exits the room, leaving Smith frozen in his chair, surrounded by the judgmental stares of the other executives. The silence in the room is deafening, and for the first time, Smith feels the sting of consequences he never thought would reach him. Word of the incident spreads quickly, rippling through the tightly knit legal community like wildfire. By the next week, whispers of Mr. Smith's public humiliation during the meeting reach the ears of his peers and clients. Details of his dismissive treatment toward a high-profile corporate figure like David become the talk of every boardroom and networking event. In his office, Smith sits at his desk, staring blankly at an email on his screen. The subject line reads, "Termination of services." It's from one of his oldest and most reliable clients, a multi-million-dollar account he's depended on for years. The message is brief but painfully clear. "Due to concerns about your firm's professionalism, we've decided to move forward with another representation." Smith rubs his temples, exhaustion etched into his face. He had received 3 similar emails that morning alone. His assistant, Anna, hesitates at the door, holding another envelope in her hand. She steps forward cautiously and places it on his desk. "Another client. Withdrawing their contract," she says softly. Smith doesn't respond, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He flips the envelope open mechanically and scans the letter. His chest tightens as he reads the closing line. "We value respect and integrity, qualities we no longer see in your firm." Meanwhile, David is seated in a sleek conference room across town, shaking hands with a team of sharp-looking lawyers from a competing firm. The atmosphere is warm and professional, a sharp contrast to the cold dismissal he experienced at Smith's office. "We're honored to have your trust," the lead partner tells him with a smile. "You can count on us to represent your company with the respect it deserves." David nods, his expression calm but resolute. "I appreciate that," he says. "It's important to me that the people I work with share the same values as my company." As the papers are signed, David glances out the window, his mind briefly returning to the man who had so arrogantly dismissed him. It's not anger or satisfaction he feels now, just clarity. He's sent his message loud and clear. Respect matters. Back at Smith's office, the atmosphere is starkly different. His once busy phone sits silent on his desk. The same man who used to command rooms and dictate deals now looks out at an empty schedule. The humbling silence is a stark reminder of the lesson he refused to learn. For Smith, the realization finally dawns. His arrogance has cost him not just his reputation, but the very foundation of his career. David steps out of the competing law firm's office, the weight of the previous week's events lifted from his shoulders. The sun shines brightly as he walks down the steps, his stride confident and purposeful. His calm demeanor reflects a quiet satisfaction, not revenge, but the reassurance that justice has been served. Across the city, Smith sits by his office window, staring blankly at the bustling street below. His office, once alive with activity, now feels eerily quiet. The sound of papers rustling and distant phones ringing is all that fills the space. His gaze falls to the stack of termination letters on his desk, the culmination of a week that has dismantled his career piece by piece. As David steps into his car, his phone buzzes. It's a message from the lead partner of his new law firm, thanking him for the trust and partnership. He smiles briefly, placing the phone down. He doesn't need to dwell on Smith's downfall. His actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. The camera shifts back to Smith, his reflection in the glass revealing a man consumed by regret. He leans back in his chair, rubbing his temples as the lesson he ignored becomes painfully clear. A calm voiceover begins, underscoring the closing moments. Never judge someone by their appearance. Respect is earned, not given. Those who fail to understand this often pay the price. The scene fades as David's car drives off into the distance, leaving behind not just the city, but a stark reminder of the consequences of arrogance and prejudice. The message is clear, powerful, and undeniable.